Magandang Araw both mean good morning. The first was in Bisaya, and the second is in Tagalog. Tagalog is the national language of the Philippines currently, but Bisaya is the language of the Visayan region of the Philippines. And the Visayan region of the Philippines is indicated here on this map in the blue. That is the central islands. The northern islands are the Luzon or Luzones area, and then you have Mindanao, which is the southern islands of the archipelago. So my name is Bato. I'm a Viscount from the Summits, a knight in the society, but now I am focusing largely on persona development based upon my maternal heritage of the Philippines. My mom is from a tiny little island north of this island right here. So this is actually two islands, Samar and Leyte. There's a tiny little island north there. It's called Biliran. And so that's where she's from. And it's probably one of the only places I've been other than I was born in Subic Bay in Luzon, or on Luzon, back in like 72 during the Vietnam War. I'm the product of the war, so anyway, I'll go. So, who am I and why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? My mom, growing up, I really wasn't really all that interested in her culture. And it's weird to say that, but it was because I lived here in the United States and I wanted to assimilate with everybody, and I think that's natural for a kid. You want to belong, right? And I did. I belonged, and if I would have never looked into a mirror, I would have thought I was your average white cowboy. I grew up in Southern Oregon, wearing cowboy boots and Wranglers, right? And high school drinking beer and partying at the lake. And and everybody treated me just like I was just one of the guys. I mean, no, I never had bad experiences or anything like that. Not maybe I'm just ignorant, but I didn't. I had a great childhood, and I love living where I lived. But as I got older, I noticed something dawned on me that we have these family traditions of cooking Filipino food at holidays and birthdays and weddings and things like that. And as I had children, they married people that were not Filipino, and that's fine. My wife is Caucasian, my dad's Caucasian, so I have no problem with that. But I realized that in a couple generations, there's going to be this pretty much normal American family that won't know why they make lumpia at Christmas. They love it, but they won't know why. And my mom, there won't be any real any evidence she ever existed. And so I wanted to learn about my culture, my cultural heritage, and pass that on to people, and also make my kids learn it and pass it on, hopefully. So I started trying to learn Tagalog, trying to learn Bisaya. Surprisingly, I know more than I ever thought I did from just picking it up from my aunties and my mom. But so that's how that started. During the pandemic, I saw this great opportunity to change from Roland von Bern, the Landskenecht Knight, to something else. Because if you know anything about Lansknechts, there is a ton of fabric, and it's a really hard pack job to get to events, right? It's tough, and so I was like, hey, Norse clothing is small and it packs up into a little chest. So I started putting together a Norse kit and bought lamellar and a helmet because I'm a fighter, and bought a tent Anybody in the market for an A-frame? No. So I started putting all this together, and I decided I'm going to make a shield. So I'm going to make a shield for my Viking kit, and I'm flipping through Pinterest, and I run across this weird shaped shield, and I was like, what is that? That's kind of a cool looking shield. And lo and behold, it's a Filipino shield. It's a Kalasag. And I was like, why would they have shields? And I wonder if they have swords or armor. They wouldn't wear armor. They live in the jungle, right? They're primitive people. Why would they wear that? And so I started researching it, and I found armor. And I was like, oh damn. I got to make that. And so I started. It just kind of snowballed, and I made this shield. And somebody encouraged me to enter it into Athenaeum, and I got a lot of great feedback, and was really encouraged. And so I decided, you know what, I'm gonna do this. And so I started researching clothing, which is tough. I mean, there's not a lot about pre-colonial Filipino clothing, especially the Visayans, and I'll explain to you why later. But it's tough because even the Filipinos can't agree on what is correct, and there's a lot of argument. So my process is that I've created a website, a WordPress website, and it's in my paper. Oh, sure, yeah. And so it's in my paper, but it's Pre-Colonial Philippines Project, WordPress.com. It's searching for reflections of myself in pre-colonial Philippines, and I post every once in a while the projects that I do and my process and pictures and things like that, and a little bit about me. So if you're interested, take a look at it. So that's my plan, is to document my work, right? Because what I've found in the past when I've done A&S stuff is I don't document stuff, and this will help me make sure I document it and to communicate the information. So, who are the Visayans? So the Visayans are the people that settled in the Visaya region of the Philippines. Where did they come from? There's a lot of argument over that. Are they the indigenous people? I don't know. I don't know a lot. The people in the Philippines have been taught things over the years that are contradictory to what other people have taught. So arguably they are Malaysian in origin. So one of the things about the Visayans is they were outstanding shipbuilders. They were a seafaring people. There are articles about their raids on mainland China, and in which they would raid mainland China for iron. They would attack people, rip their iron armor off of them, and leave them intact. They wouldn't kill people. They would take the doorknobs off of doors, pick up chopsticks that were iron, but they wouldn't steal any of the valuable gold or whatever. They didn't need gold. Gold, according to the Spanish and Portuguese, was so abundant in the Philippines that they were just picking up egg-sized pieces of gold off the ground. So they didn't need, when they arrived, the slaves, the Aripun class of people, the slave class, they wore gold, just covered in it. So they were seafaring people. They had multiple different ships ships that were intended for fishing, ships that were intended for living, for sea transport, for war. Their greatest ship was called the Tarakoa, and it was a double-hulled catamaran style ship that had outriggers on both sides, that had paddlers on the outriggers that sat in the water. They were the Tamawa class or warrior class, and they would row by sitting in the water on the pontoon, and they were 40 on each side. They were huge, huge ships. So they also had a ship called the Barangay, and this was the ship that a family would transport their family from island to island. And now the term for the local town is called a barangay, named after the ship that they all landed in. So, like I said, they were most likely from the Malaysian archipelago, and they ended up in the Visayas. So people speculate where they really came from, and this is where we get into the oral tradition. There was an author that wrote a book, and I can't remember exactly when it was, and I talked about it in the paper, but it's called the Marigatas, and it's a legend about 10 Datus from Malaysia or from Borneo that came into. They were trying to escape the oppression in Borneo, and the Srivijayan Empire, and they ended up in the Visayan Islands, and they intermingled with the locals and became chiefs or datus in that area. And later on, William Henry Scott, who wrote the book Barangay, he also wrote this book, Looking for the Pre-Hispanic Filipino. He's probably the best known authority on pre-colonial Philippines until he died, I don't know, several years ago. Him and this other guy refuted and said the Marigatas was largely a fiction and it didn't really occur. The interesting thing for me was my mom told me this story. They were taught this in school as the fact, right? And so then I started thinking about that. That's weird that this authority is, saying that that's not accurate. Well, later on, right before William Henry Scott died, he corrected his dissertation and said that he doesn't know that it's not true, that it's not a factual account. You just can't tell what time frame it happened in. So I would tend to believe the Marigatas has some validity. I haven't read it, so I don't know all of the details. I've just read kind of highlights. But there's also an interesting thing about the fact that the Marigatas is about 10 Bornean Datus, and that in Borneo today, there is a group of people that look Malaysian versus the darker skinned, black characteristic that you normally would associate with Borneo, right? And they are called the Bisaya. And the language of the Visayan region is Bisaya. So I just find that interesting, and that kind of goes to that oral tradition that's passed on, and we also have colonization that has kind of quashed that kind of education and things like that. So I'll be digging into more of that as my research progresses. A little bit about geography. There's the three regions, I talked about that. The main islands are Panay, Negros, Cebu, Bohol, Leyte, and Samar. Some would include Palawan, Romblon, and Masbate. But Palawan is this island right here. So some people don't consider that part of the Visayas. Let's see, talk about shipbuilding, literacy. When the Europeans arrived, the Filipino people, or the people that they ran into, were already literate, all the way from the top down to the children. They had a writing system. In the Visayas, they would have called that something more like Bidlat, But most prominently today, you will hear of a writing system called Babayan, and it's usually done more in the Luzonis area. The most likely source of that comes from India. It's a version of Sanskrit. There is a metal copper plate document that survived, and it's one of the few written documents that 5 minutes. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. There's a lot to talk about. Yeah, perfect. There's a lot of that writing has disappeared because it wasn't captured on something that was permanent. A lot of people would like to say that it's because the Christians came in, the Catholic Church came in, burned their scrolls and whatnot. There is one legend or one story about a monk that allegedly burned 3,000 scrolls, but a lot of people discount that because they didn't write on scrolls. They wrote on banana leaves and bamboo, and those things are deteriorable and they just go away. And they didn't write their legends and their religion and their history. They wrote contracts. The Laguna copper plate is about a slave transfer, and so that's the kinds of things that they created. Their history and their religion and things like that was all oral tradition. Social structure, largely it's a caste system. The ruling class were the Datuan or Datu class. You had the Tamawa class, which was the warrior class that served them. That they were basically free men that they didn't have to pay taxes. Their only obligation was to serve the Datu or the chief or the king. Maybe it's a Raja if it's over Datu at war. That was their obligation. And then everybody else was in the Irupun class, and that's the slave class. And there's a very interesting structure in how that works, right? I mean, if you can be born into one class, you will always be in that, and if you have kids, they will always be in that class too. They were master goldsmiths. They made beautiful gold jewelry. The thing that I was most gravitated to was their tattoos. And if you've seen me without my shirt on, you know that I have a lot of. Oh yeah. I have a lot of tattoos. When the Europeans arrived, they named them the pintados, the painted ones, and because of their tattoos, and their tattoos are symbolic of their conquests, both militarily and sexual, and they convey history of their family and things like that. They would wear their hair long. Hair length was only cut if they were in mourning or for punishment. And the clothing. Today I'm wearing a longer tunic. This would have been worn more in a formal setting. Most often, a male would have just worn a loincloth called a bahag, and probably nothing else. And then if they were in their house, they'd just go naked, right? Because it's hot and humid. I'm running out of time. So I'd love to talk to you all about, if you have any questions. But my next steps, I had mentioned in my paper that I want to start learning about gold working because I'm really interested in doing the gold granulation that is very similar to the silver granulation that the Vikings do, because I just think that is beautiful. But then I stumbled on a thing about a blowgun, and I've been talking to people about potentially using a blowgun on the archery range. So I may be doing that, I don't know. So.
And Gerald's eyes light up.
There's just so much to learn right now, and I'm just so inspired to get after this. So, and anyway, I guess I've run out of time. I'm sorry.
I have a question. So just about content I read in the paper that you didn't have time to talk
Sure,
about.
yeah.
I'd love to hear more about teeth.
Teeth, yes. So teeth. So the Viscount's were into dental modification. So a lot of times they would file their teeth into points, and sometimes some groups would not file them into points, but do what I find interesting is pegging. And what it is they, yes.
I know,
yeah,
sorry.
sorry.
An internal 13-year-old boy
Yeah.
can help.
It's gold, correction, gold pegging. Yeah, fix that, sorry. So they would drill a hole through the tooth, and this could be painful because it could hit the root, the nerve, right? But they would drill a hole all the way through, and then they'd take a gold wire and put it through, and then peen the gold wire. So depending on what tribe or group that they were from, they would use different patterns so you could identify where they were from. And some of them, and there's pictures in the paper of teeth that, there's a skull, I can't remember where it's from, it might be either Bahol or Musbati, that has, the teeth are completely caked with gold. And so yeah, so or they would color them with black by chewing betel nut. Or there's a couple other things that would stain them red. So when the Europeans arrived, the thing that they thought was funny about the Europeans is they had flat teeth, that they didn't have any modified teeth, because they thought that meant that they were unsophisticated like the monkeys, because the monkeys all have flat teeth. Any other questions?
Our generation hasn't said.
Yeah.
What I love that they were like, they are so unsophisticated, and of course the Europeans were like, they're so unsophisticated.
Yeah, right.
They're under their teeth.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, so from what you just said, you have different ways of repeating the history. The tattoos are actually, could be one of them.
Yes.
Religion. Some early civilizations through the religion, they had orators that repeated stories, or is it mostly through family?
So there's a lot of different religions. So the northern, the up north, and even in the Visayas, you will find some that have different pantheons of gods. So gods of, you have the father god or the creator god, but then you would have different gods for the sea and the different just nature or whatever. But there's also a lot of animism, and then there's a lot of ancestral worship, right? So it just kind of shoots the gambit around there. There's also Buddhism that was a big influence there. In Mindanao was primarily, and still to this day, is primarily Islam.
That changes culture.
Yeah. So there was a lot of contact with the Arabs in Mindanao early on, actually before the Portuguese arrived. Magellan arrived, and that came down through India. So there's a lot of different religions.
How early did they start writing things down, even though the Bananas and the Vandals?
So the Austronesian migration is thousands of years before the time period that I'm studying, the early, or actually the late pre-colonial era, and so they had been writing a long time before that.
What's been the most surprising thing you've learned in this process?
Oh gosh, everything. Literally, because I feel like I don't know anything. Honestly, I would say the most shocking thing is the tremendous amount of racism amongst the Filipino people within the diaspora itself across the world. Nobody can agree on anything. Everybody has their own belief of what's right, whether it is based upon what they were taught in a colonial mindset school, or what they were taught because of their indigenous upbringing and their oral traditions, or whatever they were taught in Mindanao amongst the Islamic teachings. I mean, they're just, everybody wants to be right, and nobody wants to be open-minded enough to consider that there may be more than one possible answer. So, yeah, that's the most shocking thing. And, you know, I'm half Filipino, so I'm an American, so I'm not Filipino enough. You know, which is fine. Whatever. I'm just interested in learning anything I can, so, and sharing it.
I have a question about process. So in your paper, you talked about the difficulty in trying to get pre-colonial.
Yeah.
There's been so much influence in there. So in your work with that, what has, or maybe better to say, where does that oral tradition fall in, like, versus primary source documentation? I mean, we find like so many different types. I'm interested in how you feel that the oral tradition fits in with what you've learned, what's out there to be learned.
So my background, my undergraduate degree is in history, in ancient history and U.S. history, and with an emphasis in American ethnic history. So I also am big into oral history, right? And so I started an oral history project with my mom to document that. But because of that knowledge, I think that the oral history is rapidly being lost in modern society. And primary sources, true primary sources don't exist, right? I mean, written, historical documents. Now, you may have artifacts, but then you're talking anthropology and trying to interpret that. There are a lot of older people that have provided information that are now in secondary sources, and they cite that as oral tradition, and kind of like the Mergatas, right? And so now we're trying to extrapolate oral tradition, but what happens is we're fighting against a significant amount of I hate to say Western ideal and an analysis that says, oh no, that's not true. That there wasn't enough there to support my thesis, and therefore I'm not going to trust it. You know, also having a legal background, I have a tendency to believe the eyewitness. You know, I know eyewitness testimony is sketchy, but you know, if this person's going to tell me what they were taught, then, and that's passed on, sure, you can have a bad game of telephone, but that's probably better than this historian over here, you know, trying to interpret what somebody else said, or extrapolate from anthropology, right? So, yeah, there's a question in the back.
So, you've got weapons and stuff on display. Did any of the indigenous fighting styles actually continue on somewhere, or has that been lost?
I don't know. I know that that the current Filipino martial arts styles, eskrima, arnis, and kali, which are all essentially the same thing, largely developed. They've always been there, but they largely developed out of oppression, right? By the outlawing of swords. So there have been three major conquests of the Philippines. You have the Spanish conquest, colonization that lasted 300 years. You had the United States, it lasted about 50 years, but you also have the World War II Japanese capture of the Philippines that was very oppressive as well, and they outlawed all of that stuff. So they just started fighting with sticks, right? But I have to believe that the knowledge that they taught with sticks is the same stuff they've been teaching for generations. Anything else?
I am curious about something. You mentioned that the presence of master goldsmiths and master shipbuilders, but you also talked about the caste system. Were all those master artisans in this slave caste?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I would suspect that they were probably in the Tamawa class, which is the freemen or the warrior class. I mean, the I want to say it was the Pigafetta, who was the chronicler for Magellan, referred to the Tamawa class as similar to the Hidalgos of Spain. So, thank you. Anything else? Yeah?
What about trade?
The what?
Trade?
Yeah.
Trade exchange?
So there was a massive amount of trade with China, and lots of trade with China, lots of trade with Malaysia. Anybody would, I mean, the way I envision this, and from the things that I've seen so far, is the Philippine archipelago is really a crossroads of the Southeast Asian world. And they had lots of trade fabrics. I mean, they produced coconuts and pineapples and weaving and pottery and things like that. So, and gold. Anything?
Weaving's funny.
Yeah.
The images in the weaving was funny.
Yeah, they use a backstrap loom, which I find really interesting. There's a group of weavers. I can't remember if it's Taboli or another ethnic group, but they only weave the patterns that they dream of. So they have a dream and then they'll weave that pattern, and it's always individual.
I have one final question. So, your paper was expansive. I mean, there was so much covered there. In this process, like, what's brought you the most joy?
Just feeling like I'm finding out more about where I know quite a bit about my dad's side, right? Because most of them are here in the United States or work, and I only met my grandfather one time. I never met my grandmother; she had passed away before I was born, and just feeling like I get to understand my mom a little bit more. That's it.
We have to sneak out.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
We need to, if anyone else wants to stay, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really, really appreciate it.
Sure.
Generally, the other things that you would have said if you had that last that I think.
Yeah, pretty much I'll show you all my show and tell.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many things.
Yeah.
Bato, so our next steps are, we are gonna use your reports, we're not gonna score anything,
Sure.
we're just gonna use it for feedback.
Please, I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks guys.
Thank you.
So one thing I want to geek out with you about at some point is, so in Roman culture, slaves, especially if they were taken during conquest, they would not have necessarily remained slaves. They could save up and purchase their freedom, essentially. So I'm curious in differences and how would they have gotten slaves? Would there have been an opportunity for them to become free men?
So there are stories about Oripun that served in the capacity of Timawa that eventually moved up in rank. But I don't, and you could the only time I could hear, I've heard of buying your way out of slavery was you were a half slave. So this owner had a child with this slave. The offspring is a half slave, and in this case, this owner didn't own the slave. This owner had a child with this slave, but was owned by this owner, and so the half slave had to serve the owner of the mother,
Yeah.
right? And this owner paid for their child to be a full non-slave, right? That's the only thing that I've read. And but that was when I said there's this complex system. That's that complex system that I was talking about. So yeah, the slavery was a very widely practiced thing in the Philippines. The island my mom's from, so I always just assumed that my family was from Balyran. But in a certain point, and my family could still be, but after the Spanish colonized, the Viscount's were the first to become Catholic. They just became, I mean, almost instantly on first contact, they accepted Catholicism. Datu Humabon, who was the first contact with Magellan, his wife Hume Harahumame, she was presented with a doll that was a child, like a doll of Christ, a child of Christ, right? Doll, and she resonated with that because it looked like one of their Dewata, right? And so they just assumed, they just joined on. They didn't understand what they were doing. They just adopted it. So a lot of them converted, largely because Humalban told people, "You're going to convert," right? Because I'm making this alliance with the King of Spain, which they didn't know what Spain was, but it's this big, great king, right? And so that's how the whole legend and story of Datu Lapu-Lapu coming in and killing Magellan at the Battle of Mactan occurred, because Lapu-Lapu didn't want to convert. He didn't want these people taking over. He also had a personal beef with Humama. But anyway, they converted to Christianity. These people are Islamic, and these people are still animistic and Buddhist, right? Well, when the Spanish took over, they stopped slavery. They stopped engaging in slave trade, right? And they become much more peaceful, right? Turn the other cheek kind of thing, right? Well, Mindanao saw them as weak, and so there's a story about how the entire island of Balyran at one time was completely depopulated because the warriors from Mindanao came up and took the entire population.
Wow.
So, as slaves. So that leaves me to question whether or not we are actually from there. Our grandparents are actually from this island of Bohol, so I don't know. I mean, but if we are from here and we came there late, after that depopulation and our people moved in there, we very well could be part of an indigenous group called the Warai Warai. And knowing the people and a little bit about their internal culture, it's very much like the people that I met when I was when I went to visit. They practice that same culture.
Well, I'm so fascinated with all of the legal aspects too. There's a lot of writings in Italy about basically sexual laws, sexual crime, and somebody who is a slave if somebody has sex with them without the owner's consent, it is actually considered a property crime, not a sexual crime. Because it is not the slave's place to give consent, it is the owner's. And so even if the person who is like a concubine or a slave gives enthusiastic consent, it is, you have now stolen from me because you have made use of my property without my consent.
Yeah, I haven't read
All of
any.
that, so
I haven't read anything about that, but yeah, that would be interesting to know.
Yeah, they have like, because they also have the concept of course, there's the class, if there's, unauthorized by the church sex between classes, who is the male, who is the, female, and then also what class structure they both are. And then they had a concept of when someone stops being a child. And there was not a set age, but there was definitely this legal concept of there was sexual engagement without consent of the church and or the family. And was this person still considered to be a child or an adult? And
That's interesting.
that impacts
Everything I've read has been how unbelievably sexually liberated and open the Filipino culture was. I mean, ultimately, mothers would encourage their children to go have sex at early ages, like 11. So, I mean, it was not desirable to marry somebody that had not had sex. I mean, at least at that time. Anything else? Well, thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, I'm curious to see you.
Yeah.
To see this show and tell.
Yeah. So we have a couple. So we'll just start here. So this is a Chris knife for a Kalis that Brynjar. He's a knife smith in the Summits made for me when I was Prince. It's ridiculously sharp. It's patterned after a Malaysian style. You can.
Including the
Yeah.
Was it used for combat?
So sometimes they were used for combat. Sometimes they were used for used for ceremony. Chris knives typically are used for ceremony, but there's evidence that some of them were used in combat. And then this one is a Compulon, and the blade was made by Nicholas Cocciolo, and then the handle was done by Master Bryn. And then the hook up there is called a head hook. They would use so there was a lot of head hunting, but they would cut off a head and use the hook to pick up the head.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's hair.
Yeah.
Real hair.
No.
Well, it's supposed to be real hair.
and that's it looked like it was going to be heavier than it was.
Yeah.
Typically the when I've seen like just commercially manufactured blades from most regions of Asia, they're really thin.
Yeah. I would say that this is probably a little thicker than the ones that you would find in period, and yeah. So this is the cutting edge. This is the blade, and then and it's pattern welded.
I haven't even picked up on that.
Yeah.
The handles are fabulous. Wow. The weight they have to balance. I actually feel very comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just quite useful.
And then this one is called a sundong, and a sundong is both. I got this when I was 18 when I went to the Philippines. This is it's made out of a leaf spring, from a Jeep, and it is it's both a farming implement. It's a utilitarian knife, but they also use it as for self-defense.
Right.
Kind of like a machete.
Yeah, it's
In
very
a
much.
way, that actually seems more historically accurate
Yeah.
to me, because you're using scavenged iron.
Yeah. So this is a game called Sumka. It looks like Alcala, right? Apparently, this was in place when the Europeans arrived. They played it already. It has different rules, but it is played outside because it's unlucky to play it indoors. This is a rattan ball that is for a game called Sipa, and it's like played like hacky sack. Let's see what else. This is a palayok, and it's a cooking pot. It's a clay cooking pot. I have two other ones, different sizes, and I haven't used them yet, but I plan to be doing period cooking during summer.
So lightweight.
Yeah.
What was the main food?
So they cooked a lot of different things. I mean, obviously rice. I mean, most people were raising rice, but my grandpa, one of his favorite things to cook was called humba, and humba is like adobo, which is with vinegar and soy sauce, onions, and garlic. But it was pork belly chopped into chunks like that, and then you put it in there and you just cook it and cook it and cook it until it just falls apart. So yeah, so pork, chicken. They rarely would eat the cabal or the water buffalo because I mean they will, but it's also their tractor, right? So I mean there's a reason that they.
Assume they ate a lot of fish?
A lot of fish. Yeah, when I was over there, primarily fish, and bananas and Sealy, yeah. Yeah. Sealy laboyo is like a Thai bird pepper, and then they have a lot of mangoes, fruits, and stuff like that. Papaya,
Monkeys.
monkeys.
Yeah. When you say pre-colonial, so what rough time frame are you?
So the contact was in 1521.
Okay.
And so that was when Magellan landed. So I'm talking my time period that I'm studying is probably from that point to maybe 100 years prior to that.
So like mid-16th. So
Yeah. So these are modern kukui nuts from Hawaii, but they use them, they're indigenous to the Philippines. Kukui nuts are also called candle nuts. And candle nuts have a tremendous amount of oil. You can burn one of these and they will burn for hours. There's a lot of different uses. This is a necklace made out of mango wood. Mango wood is the little one, and papaya wood is the big one. They use seashells, brass, gold. So this is an earring. These are earrings that I made that are
I'm sure.
that are faux Pomeranian earrings. The reason that they're faux is because they would normally have a gauge instead of a post, and eventually when my ears get completely finished being gauged, then I'll be able to wear them. But they would normally they would wear either gauged Pomeranian big discs, or they would wear hoop earrings that were like almost a 3/4 inch gold hoop through their ear. Just they had lots of gold, knee rings, arm rings, bracelets, anklets. This is a mask of of Bakanawa, which is a serpent a sea serpent that legendarily was the cause of the lunar eclipse. They would go out and allegedly it would swallow the moon, and so the Viscount's would go out and beat pots and pans or bamboo sticks together to scare away Bakanawa and reclaim the moon. Let's see. So this is my version of a sa'ob. which is a coat. They only wore these in very, very formal situations because most of the men would want to show off their tattoos because they would be covered in tattoos, and they wore their tattoos like clothes. But when Homaban converted to Catholicism, he was presented with a silk coat from Magellan, and Magellan asked him to wear that silk coat when he swore his fealty to Philip of Spain.
Was it a silk, Chinese silk or Thai silk?
I'm not sure. Where Magellan got the coat, but they did have silk from China or Thailand. So this is called a bajong or a conch shell, and they use them as instruments. And I think I can blow it.
That's his new one.
Yeah. Please have one of those.
He just got that one.
It was like a trumpet.
Yeah.
Oh, he has that one too.
So
It says
over
Philippines on
here,
it, so we got him a new
I
one.
have so all the hats, that hat and this hat, and are called, they are referred to as a salaka. They're just a bamboo hat. I just got this one in Hawaii, but I didn't have a place to put it, and it looks very much like the ones they use in China or Japan, but they wore them in the Philippines as well. So this armor is patterned after a suit of armor worn by a prince of Luzon, and it would have been made out of water buffalo hide. And I wore it for a while. Too heavy and hot. But now I have a breastplate that I made out of leather that looks like a musculata, but then I matched my tattoos to it, so it looks like I'm not wearing anything. So that's what I've got.
Yeah, I was curious, with all the iron raids, were they primarily using the iron for weapons?
Yes.
Or for, okay.
Yep, for weapons. So there were some iron deposits in the Philippines, but not a lot. They actually didn't mine their gold. There's a story about one Datu that says that if I want gold, I'll go out and dig it up, but it's safer in the ground than if I picked it up and kept it in my house.
So the primary languages that you mentioned, have you done any comparison to what language branches that they follow?
Oh, so many. So they're all Austronesian in origin, and so the Austronesian languages span. They go all the way out into Oceania, right? The Polynesian languages are all Austronesian languages, and so thank you.
Bye.
See you, Leith. So yeah, there's so many different languages. I mean, there's a significant Samoan is significantly the same as Tagalog.
Okay.
Which is interesting because Tagalog has a lot of Spanish in it.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
Thank you so much. Before I run off, so we've never met. Isabella de Firenze. I'm actually the ANS champion of Theory right now, and I've made it kind of my goal that anytime somebody impresses me with ANS stuff or anything like that, I give them my token. So
Aww.
I'd like to give that to you.
thank you.
It's dyed in indigo, and I did it myself. And if it leaks a little, if you get it wet, it might leak a little indigo. Just kind of give it a little bit of vinegar bath. It should settle down.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.